Hi, Sven.
Ciao. So I'm Huzjan. I'm an artist based in Brussels, but coming from Slovenia. And it's super that you were showing these things now about the travel to Switzerland and the mobility. I don't know if that's on purpose, but it has really a lot to do with this book. It's a kind of a nice introduction. And I also, in a sense, today I didn't bring any images to show, because I think already the book is full of images, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's also nice to talk books, you know, or maybe the ultimate mobility then would be that everybody carries a book in themselves, no, and you walk around and you are a book, no. That's also very nice to think about. But yeah, I wanted to say something about the narrative part of the book, because I think a lot of times, particularly with artist books, the materiality becomes very important, no? And how it feels the book, or you know, the imagery that is inside. But the written part or the text part of the book is sometimes either hidden or it's overlooked in a sense, you know, when it is read and so on and so on. So basically, this book is a result of a certain travel that happened, and it all started in 2012. When I was invited to come to South Korea, to Seoul, for a residency program. And this was organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art in Ljubljana in collaboration with the Museum of Contemporary Art in Korea on the 20th anniversary of economic exchange between the two countries. So there was already a kind of obscure context to start with. So and me and some other artists, we were invited to come there for 3 months, but there was no money, there was basically no budget, you know, there was a kind of a weird situation. So, but anyway, I gathered some kind of resources and I went there, but because of this lack of the budget, already how to get there, in a sense of buying the ticket and being there and being able to find conditions under which you will work, there was actually no time really to build a certain project. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, you know, then I take this opportunity and I just go to South Korea and let's see what happens. I will try to find something there, no? So I come there and immediately the first kind of natural thing is, okay, I'm gonna get in touch with the contemporary art scene in Korea, right? So I start going to exhibitions and I meet other Korean artists that are from kind of the same generation. But what was very clear and very fast was that there was no true contact, in a sense that I was not able to identify with the contemporary art production in South Korea. It just felt, you know, super foreign in a way, as if I fell on Mars or something, you know, like I would not understand it. It was I was incapable of understanding. But in one of the shows that had a kind of a historic context, that was dealing with the historic context, there was some images of Korean land art scene from the late 60s. And when I saw those black and white photos, immediately I understood what they were about. There was an immediate connection between me and that work. And I didn't think of it about it in terms of research a lot, but I just said, okay, so this is the first thing that I'm able to adopt. Let's go further. Let's try to find more of these black and white photos. So I went to the Arco archives, which is a contemporary art archive in Korea. I think it's from the 80s, started in the 80s. And the National Archive of the Arts in the south part of the city, which holds everything that has to do with art since forever. It's really, really amazing and it's super well organized and so on and so on. So I came to these archives because I thought this is where I'm going to find the material. But of course, I come there and everything is written in Korean and I don't understand nothing, you know. So there was immediately like a huge wall between me and the material. But these people working there, they were extremely, extremely nice. So they just designated a curator and two assistants to me that they would help me. So first of all, I asked them to give me some books that would also have English translations of maybe of these certain images that I brought with myself of these artists that I didn't know who they were. So they start bringing me some books and I go through them, and slowly, slowly I started building up a kind of a list of artists and list of groups and stuff that was happening in the past in Korea. And I figured out that actually there was a kind of a association, which is the Korean Avant-Garde Association, which was not a group, but was more or less a concept that would change places where people would meet and discuss what they're doing. Because at that time they had a kind of a severe military dictatorship in Korea, and there was a need of a certain middle class, higher middle class artists that they were kind of breaking through. They were looking for liberty, no, in a way. So in informal sense, they were coming up with kind of similar results as artists in Japan, United States, West Europe, Yugoslavia, etc. And immediately I was just seeing these images and I was able to adopt them. I understood everything. So I started making an archive. And the only way that I could do that, because they were not allowing me to take the books out of the building, was that I was using the Xerox in the archives. And I started Xeroxing these images. Okay, so after a while I have a huge pile of this stuff. And I brought it back to the studio in the residency. And I also, at the same time, while I was doing the archive of the images, I was also making a kind of a list of artists and how they were connected and who influenced who. And later, after the association was not functioning anymore, which of the groups they would influence or events they created, etc., etc. So in the end, it was like a thought diagram that I created of the association, particularly because, in fact, they themselves never archived it, have not archived it yet. And out of all of the artists that were, present in this avant-garde association, out of all of them, there is only one still that goes forward with the same kind of avant-garde thinking, and that's Lee Sang-tik, who just recently had his first, overview show. And a lot of them, after a while, and from the pressure, from political pressure, a lot of them turned to painting, and they started doing this minimal kind of painting that was selling really well in the West, because in I think 72 or 73, they participate in the Paris Biennial, and this is for the first time that they're introduced to the Western audience. So yeah, so I had this material in the studio, and particularly I was interested in the land art aspect of their practices, or earthworks, or like kind of also arte povera interventions and so on. This is like there was a certain personal system that I devised. And in the end of the 3 months period that I was there, I decided, okay, I'm not going to fly back to Europe, but instead, in the spirit of this discovery, I'll hand bind the material in a book, and I'm going to bring it back overland. So I'm going to take a boat to China, because they didn't allow me to go to North Korea, to pass North Korea, and then take a train to Mongolia and go to Russia and go to Ukraine and Budapest and finally come back to Ljubljana. That was my goal. And that's what I did. I packed up the whole studio on a rucksack, and that's funny, the images, so basically the whole studio was on my back, and I took the book, which was it had a very hard cover because I wanted to kind of make it safe for the journey. And I made 2 copies of the same book. So one I left in Korea, one I brought back to Ljubljana. And this, in that book, at that time, this was only images from the Korean Avant-Garde Association that actually ceased to exist in 74. So they were like, around 5 years. And they had a magazine that was supposed to be quarterly, but in the end it came once a year out, and there was like 4 issues of that magazine. So I come back to Ljubljana after a month of travel, and immediately when I come back, like any good research, you end up with a question. No? And the question was, okay, now I'm back, now I have to rethink this experience. And the question was, why was I able to adopt this? No? In a sense, like most of the things that you recognize, you can't recognize them unless you haven't seen them already, right? So I thought, okay, so who is, oh yeah, and then I remembered, but there was this, you know, group Oho that was quite influential actually in not just Slovenia, but Yugoslavia. And they were also kind of known in the West because they did the information show in 1970 in MoMA, and they were kind of present in Germany at the same time. And Walter de Maria also came to Ljubljana to visit them, and so on and so on. So they were, you know, I've been around their images. They've been popular enough that I've seen their images. And so I started asking people around in Ljubljana who has the archive of their work. And so it goes that in the end, the Zagreb Museum of Contemporary Art bought of their works, but the the Museum of Contemporary Art in Ljubljana holds the archive, which was made by the wife of one of the members. And it was a kind of a gift to the museum. And they just recently digitalized it, which was amazing, you know. It's not publicly accessible, but they gave me access. And then all of a sudden I had this big digital archive of the Oho on one side, and on the other side I had this book that I brought from Korea. And I just started, you know, clicking and opening the book. And it was amazing that these two movements that I know for sure never had contact until mid-70s, maybe, but probably not, had such similar formalization of their thoughts. You know, I mean, in the essence, they're truly different because, for example, when I don't know, David Nes of the Oho group splits a pile of earth in two parts and cuts into the pile. He says, "I'm making a drawing into earth," no, like something that you could recognize also in Belgium or France, or with the movements in the same period. But then in Korea, when the Mission, one of the Korean artists, when he does that, he says, "This is my country. My country is divided in two parts, and I'm not making a drawing, but I'm making a representation of my country." So there was a little bit more political or shamanistic, and I think here was much more formal, within dealing with the art part of it and so on. So, but yeah, so I had these two archives, and I started comparing it, and it all kind of made sense. And the decision was that we should put it together in a book, and that's when I came into contact with through various people with Luc, and from the Mer Paper Kunsthalle, the designer and director of the institution. I came to him with a PDF basically that I made of the images, of scanning the book and having the digital photos from the Oho, and the book I brought with me from Korea, and we started looking at it, and he said, like the book is finished in a sense, but we just have to kind of tweak the design in a sense to make kind of a sense out of it. And he said, plus the way my production is going with the Mer Paper Kunsthalle, I'm interested in really making books that would be artworks that find themselves in the form of a book and not the other way around. And I want to make clear that. So he asked, would it be interesting for you that you also expand the idea that the book holds and to amplify the notion that it's actually an artwork? And I said, yeah, sure. To me, that was completely a natural thing, because I had in my practice already over 10 art books that I did, and some of them were kind of extreme objects, or on a border of what a book format is and so on. It was questioning the format actually. And so I was so super interested in that, and so there was a few elements that were kind of interesting in terms of dealing how to present the knowledge part, and the other one of how to go towards representing the book in a sense of an artwork. So one of the first decisions was that okay, there is a historic part and there is a certain value in that. It holds a certain knowledge. How can we present that in a format of a book? And we ended up by having a book that has no covers. And the reason for this is that you're trying to protect a certain heritage, and you can put metal plates around it, but the way that you can really truly protect it, you make its vulnerability be seen, so that actually the holder has to be very careful with it. So, I mean, this book is very, very fragile in the sense that somebody who holds now this knowledge, who is in possession of this knowledge, has to be very careful with it. No? And that was the design choice that we had, that it would have no covers. The other aspect about this historical part was that it was a kind of a rediscovery of something. As I said already, the Korean artists, they never even were archived in this way together, because also the market is preventing that, because some of them became very successful commercially, so their earlier practice is not supposed to be seen that much. So it was a kind of a and then we had this idea to have Japanese binding, that on the inside, if you look on the inside of the pages, there's the caption of the image that it's on the front. So you have to dig for the information. You have to go inside the book in order to retrieve, the information out. So you are also doing some kind of research while you're reading the book in terms of formalization. No? And also the flaps of the kind of outside of the book on both sides, it holds these diagrams that I created of the two groups. So you have like a chronological overview of the Slovenian group on one side and a chronological overview of the Korean on the other side. So you have then it becomes kind of clear that every time you open a book, on the left-hand side you have the Slovenian photo, and on the right-hand side you have the Korean one. So they're constantly mirroring each other. They're constantly looking at each other in a way. So that was one part. And then the other part of expanding it, but we also decided, I have to say this before, we also decided to have a very, very small edition, so that we would have, now it's 50, we made 50 copies, and they're all signed and stamped and so on and so on. And that's because we decided to add on the back side at the colophon a certain text that reads like this, and it's directly refers to actually my travel between Korea to Ljubljana, and it reads: as one buys or comes to own the publication at hand, one has a right to ask István Huzjan to come to his or her preferred location and perform his piece entitled Od tu do tu, from here to there. Huzjan's performance is a simple gesture where the artist enters the chosen location and barefooted measures the distance between two random architectural elements chosen together by the artist and the person in possession of the book. To mark the starting point of the measuring, the artist writes down Od tu, from here, directly on the first architectural element, and to mark the end point, the artist writes down the measured distance on the second architectural element. Do tu meri x stopal, to here measures x number of feet. During the performance, the artist talks about his work and the context of the publication. If the holder of this book chooses to exercise his or her right to the performance, he or she is asked to contact the artist so that the details of the visit can be arranged. And then there's my email address. When contacting the artist, please refer to the number below. The right to the performance is valid till the death of the artist. And then there's some fine print in sense of how the financing part of travel works, etc., etc. But basically, so everybody who buys the book gets to own this performance. And it's I think it's a clever way of how to expand, in a sense. And that's why we also, every time we present the book, also in fairs, we're trying to do something special so that it kind of doesn't get lost amongst other books. But we're either making it less accessible, or maybe showing only a part of it, or only I come and I talk about it, like now, So we are dealing with the travel of the book actually quite a lot also. So it's very nice that it kind of fits together. So, but of course, this is then another research, and this research here, as any good research, ends up with a question. No? And now, what is the question now? I mean, the big elephant in the room, no? Is how come that these two groups are so similar, no? How did that happen in the context of me going to Korea and not having that now with the contemporary scene, no? And this is something still to be answered, no? And until now, within almost a year that the book has been dealt with in that way with this question, I think it's very important. A lot of people first react of talking about zeitgeist, and this kind of collective consciousness, or this is how they explain it, since there is no internet, and at that time. And I don't really believe in this. I think that's it doesn't convince me. Until now, the answer that I found and the most convincing is that, in fact, because of probably the political situation at that time in the Cold War, in certain developed parts of the world, and I'm talking about West Europe, United States, Japan, Yugoslavia, probably big part of Soviet Union as well. So this part of the world, they were kind of fighting each other, parts of them, no? But at the same time, they were all very, very careful to have a very stable middle class. I think whether you were in the States or in Russia at that point, both of the governments were kind of rebuilding the middle class, and that was the focus. So I think there was a equal kind of social standard all over the world at one point there. And I think because of that, they were able to come up with the same things. But, it's still a speculation, but this is something, the way of thinking that I would be interested in to think further. And in the end, I would just like to tell another little story. And it's another book that this book also made, and it was on the travel between Korea and Slovenia. Before I started traveling back, I brought from Slovenia a 10-euro bill, and I changed the 10-euro bill on the day I went to China into Korean won, and they gave me something like 16,000 won, and I took a picture of the 10-euro bill. So then with the Korean money, when I came to China, I changed it into Chinese yuan. And they didn't take some coins, but the paper they changed. So I got, I don't know, 200 yuan or something like that. And I took a picture of the Korean money. And I repeated this process when I came to Mongolia with their tugrik. And then when I went to Russia with ruble, and Ukraine with hryvnia, and to Hungary with forint, and finally when I came back to Ljubljana, to Slovenia, I changed it back to euros. And every time I would get a bank slip also, no? When I change the forint in Ljubljana, they don't take some coins, and the money that they change, I get back €1.75 in coins. So basically the whole value disappears. And so I had this kind of archive of this loss of 82.5% of the original value, and I put it together in a book that is now in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Ljubljana. So another book came out. But maybe this book is also, which is just an edition, it's a kind of edition of one, it's an object. It's also maybe one of the triggers to think about when thinking about this question of, at that time, what was happening and what is happening today, in the sense of how the world is. I mean, basically, you cross Eurasia, and just by changing the money physically in each of these countries, you lose all of it, basically. If you would do it in one bank, because you can go to a bank and you change through all the currencies, but you lose maybe half of it or something. But when you're physically present there, when you actually experience how one neighbor deals with another, then you lose much more, and so on. So you have also some questions?
Yeah, you already answered a lot of my questions while speaking, which is already quite nice. But I was just very interested in this notion of discovery, the fact that you used a lot of archive documents and really created something that didn't exist before, this link between those two movements or artist groups, and decided to do a book about it, also to kind of diffuse this information. But I understand the fact that it's also in the context of you as an artist, in the context of an artist book or art books publishing house. But I was just wondering about this idea of doing only few copies regarding this question of diffusion, and also the fact that it's quite expensive. And if I understood it well, then there is no exhibition around it or no other way of diffusing this content. What would you do about the fact that it's an important content and it would need to be maybe much more known than just for 50 persons, even if there is a performance.
I totally understand, and we are actually working a lot on that. I mean, the book is one thing now, but the other aspect of distributing this knowledge, what we're doing is the book has been now in, I think, 5 or 6 shows. It's at the moment is shown in Montmartre in Amsterdam, and how I show it there is I photocopy the whole book, so the circle is concluded, you know, like I deal with it like I dealt with the books in Korea, and then the photocopies are pasted on the wall, so it becomes a work that all of the visitors there will, you know, get to own, and after the show it will be destroyed. But the same thing we did that in Middelburg, in Vleeschaal, we did it in Ghent. There was another show on books, and you know, all the time we are basically showing the book, and also touring a lot with the fairs and so on. And every time we go there, basically you have an opportunity to buy this book, which is kind of expensive and a small number, but at the same time we always give another opportunity to experience it in another way, so that a broader public is getting it. Also, when I did some lectures, I also showed the slideshow, and then the PDF of the slideshow stays somewhere, and so on. So, you know, we are dealing with that. And for example, which was also super funny, the David Senior, who from MoMA, they also acquired it, and they acquired it because we met in January. We met, and he said, you know, we are having a reading group now in the library, and the reading group is on East European modernism and South Korean modernism. So you made a textbook for us, you know. So okay, so this book is now acquired by a bigger institution, but in that bigger institution, it's part of that reading book, and it's again, you know, it goes around, you know. So yeah, I mean, we are not. Well, you know, we could have gone much crazier here. You know, it could have been 5 books and, you know, I don't know, 1,000 a pop, or you know. I think we made a kind of a compromise here, that we still deal with an artwork, but at the same time we find a way how to be careful enough to distribute its information, you know, to wider audience.
Okay, well, at least. This notion of expanding the book and this experience seems to be then quite wide, and also on different levels or different formats, performance, and also PDFs and digital formats, which I think is quite relevant since you had to deal with digital archives, but also paper and photocopying things. So I think it's also something that we can feel when flipping through the book. And it's also nice that it relates to the fact that it was Xeroxed at some point. Did you do a special treatment on the images coming from the digital archive so that they?
Well, it was digitalized in a certain way, so they had to be worked on a little bit, the images, because in fact it was not the best scanning job that somebody did.
Yeah.
You know, but So we worked on it a little bit, but nothing really special. I mean, not in terms of changing, just clarifying the images a little bit.
All right.
In terms of that, it's a very simple book. You know, we also went with a kind of I think expected typography. You know, just it's a Helvetica Neu, and it's very, you know, in that way it's very simple. So that I think this idea, then it becomes more accessible. You know, like you don't deal with so many other information. You know, you just can directly go to the images. And also something I wanted to tell you, because when you brought me the 2 more copies we asked you for the exhibitions, you asked me to put white gloves next to the book, and I also got this copy that we had. You sent it for the prize for the jury, and we've got it. I mean, it's not something that we have to give back to you, as I think it is. And anyway, it was given to the contributors of the catalogue who already manipulated them, and there is a little stain here. So what I decided, in fact, for this exhibition is to not put the white gloves, but then to show this version, so that we don't have... We see it's fragile, and we take care of it, I hope, every visitor of the show. But at the same time, it's also something... I think the white gloves can be also a kind of wall for the public and for the reader. And in this context, where no other book have white gloves, that's why I decided to show this one, and the other ones I think I prefer only showing this one, hoping that no one steals it, and then no white gloves. So that's perfect. I completely agree with your choice. You see, this one is also not signed, and so on.
So then
it's a viewing copy. It's perfect for the exhibition, and it should get stained, and it's fine. You know.
All right. So thanks a lot. And
you're welcome.